Welcome to the beginning of Sonic Stop Motion Adventures Creator Commentaries. I'll be talking about the entire show, episode by episode, kicking off with Season 1, which itself, of course, kicks off with Episode 1. Note that right here I called it a mini-series. At the time I did other things on my channel, well I guess I still do, but I did not realize this would become the main thing of my channel, by any means. This room at the time was my brother's room, but he has long since moved out, and it is now the room that I reside in, and that I am recording this very commentary in. In the early episodes, it wasn't even stop motion, it was mostly a slideshow, and I would use video to convey movement that I couldn't animate, I guess. Note right here that Tails, of all people, gets the very first swear in the series. That shot of Sonic's face as he's talking to Tails is probably the only decent shot, relatively, even though it's out of focus, but it's probably the only decent shot in this episode. And as you can clearly see, this is long before I used actual sets. Instead, I just ran around my house filming at random parts. And when the series first started, I did not write scripts. Instead, I would take pictures and form a general sense of the story in my head, and then afterwards scan through the pictures I took and record voices as I went along. Thinking of doing that now is absolutely baffling, but I had basically no standards on how to make the show look back when it started. I also had no idea it would become what it eventually became. The walls in my house have also changed color a few times, and the furniture has changed too, so this is like a very strange time capsule in a way. Right there you can see my dog Joey had jumped up in the background, and that's what that figure is in the door back there.
What the hell happened just now? The Chaos Emerald, a jewel containing ultimate power. Now I know what's going on. The government has been mistaking me for the likes of you. So, where do you think you're going with that emerald? Say something, you fake hedgehog. Oh, shut up. Stop using lines from that damn game.
My shadow voice right there changed, I think, like 3 times in that one line alone.
I'm on a journey to collect all the Chaos Emeralds. Hey, so am I. Hey, I got an idea.
The animation here is spectacular, honestly. I don't think I could ever top this level of movement in general. If memory serves, the frame on this TV that is right there, I believe that is a frame from an episode of iCarly, and you can kind of make out like the viewfinder effect from like first-person camera. The idea that they would only search for 4 Chaos Emeralds came about because of the fact that I only had 4 individual emeralds to use, and 2 of them were actually yellow. If I had made the show now, like started it at the age I am right now, I would have simply bought extra emeralds, or any supplies for that matter, but when you're an 11-year-old, your budget is extremely limited, if not non-existent in the first place.
Start looking. Not so fast. Oh, not you again. That's right. You can't start looking because you gotta beat me. Ow, ow, ow. Hey, Shadow, look.
Okay, so I'm going to mute this section for the sake of commentary, and most likely swap it for the season upload, but the original music I used here was Shockwave by Black Tide. It's a really awesome song. Another instance of just filming myself moving the toys instead of actually stop-motion animation. You'll see a lot of that in these early episodes. Yeah, again, 2 of the emeralds are yellow. That's because the Toy Island figure line didn't actually include every color of Chaos Emerald, but rather gave you a lot of the same couple of colors. So when I first made this video, Jazzwares either did not have, or was at the very beginning of having the Sonic the Hedgehog license, and that means the 3-inch line was not a thing. Even the Superform Superposers, they weren't out yet, but the mock-ups were. I would later resort to recoloring them to show the characters in their super forms. But looking back, it's ridiculous that I just showed the mock-ups of their in-box Superform figures. But I was happy to poke fun at that in the Episode 1 remake that would come out much later. I gotta love Windows Movie Maker credit sequences. I want to personally thank everyone that came back to Episode 1 after the series ended and commented about the fact that it was all over. My 11-year-old past self thanks you. Episode 2, The Evil Bootleg Sonic. I want to quickly comment on the show's title, Sonic Stop Motion Adventures. I can now admit that I had basically put no thought into the name, and it was most likely just the first thing that popped into my head when naming the upload on YouTube. And here we have the introduction of the Season 1 villain, the infamous Bootleg Sonic. The idea here was that I had ordered a set of Resource Wave 2 bootlegs on eBay, not knowing they were bootleg, and I actually found out before they arrived at my house that they were, and I had been duped. When I found out, I guess I made the most of it with this character. Years later, I have now found out that they were probably not even bootlegs at all, but just factory rejects of the actual figures. The figure is Skiing Sonic from that set, and I think it's fitting as the character of Bootleg Sonic with the different shoes, which Sonic points out here, and strangely shaped eyes. I want to draw attention to the fact that at the time of recording this episode has more views than Episode 1, which I think is rather uncommon. It's usually the first one, or like the first part, that gets more attention, but maybe this title was catchier.
You wanna stop me? I mean, we could fight or something, but I would win.
I don't have any explanation for why Bootleg Sonic has all those powers, he just does. I don't know, it sounded cool. In the background here, you can actually see that is where I shot the end of Sonic Stop Motion Adventures video, coming full circle, kind of. I love that Shadow asks what Bootleg Sonic's deal is, and then Sonic explains for him, having only just learned this information himself and right in front of Bootleg Sonic. Like, he could have repeated, or Sonic and Shadow could have been at the same location at the same time. I don't know. Shadow just kind of makes a throwaway comment here that you could literally destroy his friends, but he would only get angry at you if you stole his powers. I guess I thought that made him sound edgy or dark or something.
Damn it! How are we gonna find him now? Don't worry, he's not the only person with chaos control.
Okay, so coming up, I have absolutely no idea why I decided to line up these cases like this right here. I guess I thought it would make it interesting, and I think I remember videos around this time kind of doing similar things. Right here, you can hear Sonic say, "We're back," and then I respond as Shadow saying, "Ugh, you again," as Bootleg Sonic turns around, but Bootleg Sonic was the one that was supposed to say that line, but that's what not writing a script gets you. I guess Sonic and Shadow enlisted the help of these three off-screen, including the robot that they fought last episode. I'm gonna mute probably the rest of the episode here, just for the sake of the commentary upload. But I had used a couple of copyrighted songs, the first of which was Sabotage by the Beastie Boys, and then after that I'm flat out just using Darude Sandstorm, although that's, in my defense, that is before it became the meme we know it now. I just remember it being a popular techno song back in the day. It's probably the best exchange of dialogue right here that I've ever written. I don't give any reason for the robot suddenly helping them out here. Shadow even says you always come in handy, but in the previous episode they were fighting over the Chaos Emeralds. Tails doing a lot of good here, just presenting the Chaos Emeralds only to have Bootleg Sonic steal them. As you can tell, a lot of areas I shot were simply spaces that were somewhat flat and I could set all the figures on. Where Shadow, Bootleg Sonic, and the robot were just standing was the same spot that I had used in the first episode where Sonic and Tails talk. A lot of the commentary for the first, more rough episodes like this will be a lot of me talking about how some of the, talking about some of the decisions I made in jest, and with a lot of hindsight. But once I move on to the later episodes, I'll have much more to say about the actual production of them as a whole, and sort of the integrity of the story. I've said it before, but I used to be able to make an episode, I think really only the first 3 or 4. I used to be able to make them in a day. And it isn't hard to see why. I mean, this isn't even stop motion. It's literally a slideshow. So taking all of the pictures obviously didn't take long, and neither did the recording of the voices either. This ending joke of forcing Bootleg Sonic to watch Sonic X for 10 hours. Back then I had seen a lot of people making fun of Sonic X, and I didn't really have too strong of an opinion myself, one way or the other. But years later, I think this ending joke actually still stands, because I personally don't really care for Sonic X at all. Watching it subbed is a little easier, but overall, it's a very childish show, and it doesn't really grip me too much. Oh, this video feature here, I do a little cast roll. Remember how in like old video games, it would do that? Like it would go through like the characters and say who, like, oh, the enemies, like, oh, Motobug. And I didn't do it for Sonic 1, but you know what I'm talking about. Episode 3, Shadow's Adventure. I think what I was going for when the series first started was sort of, a vignette kind of way of storytelling, with each episode not having too much to do with one another, other than using the same characters. Because of this, I tried to vary the stories I did, so I chose to do a whole episode focusing just on Shadow, and it makes sense, because if I was doing the series in the same kind of way I was doing it back then, only now, I'd probably do something similar. Of course, this audio from this section is lifted right from the opening cutscene to Shadow the Hedgehog. So the animation quality right here has already gotten better compared to episodes 1 and 2. This turns, but right there, oof. I remember being so excited as a kid because I thought the animation looked so great and so much more fluid. I think this was the first episode where I used an actual tripod to shoot. One that my dad had either bought me or handed down to me. Fun fact, that is the only tripod I've ever used to shoot the show, and it's still the one I use to this day. You can actually see one of the legs in a frame. I'll try to point it out coming up. That animation quality jump, though, it would kind of go back down in some of the episodes after this. Unfortunately, so it was kind of inconsistent that way. So the plot of this entire episode is pretty much just episode 1 again, but with only Shadow going on a quest for the Chaos Emeralds, and he doesn't go super at the end. He even fights the same robot like they did in the first episode. So right here he calls out the fact that the owner of these figures, Big Me, only had 4 emeralds, breaking the 4th wall, but at least offering a somewhat funnier explanation as to why he's only looking for 4 instead of just like, oh, let's just look for 4, oh well. Okay, so overall, I actually really like this episode for what it is, especially since you can start seeing improvements this early in the show, even though they kind of backtracks a little bit later, but these episodes, these early episodes kind of blend together for me after all this time. So for the longest time, I thought they were all kind of the same quality, but that kind of isn't the case. I think there's also an ever so slight increase in picture quality too. I think I had discovered the portrait setting or some other setting on the camera I was using. Also a good time to mention that the camera, oh, that frame was with the tripod back there when he's falling off the ledge. The camera I was using for so many of my early videos was this really basic digital camera I had inherited from my mom after she got a new one. So shout out to my mom for upgrading when she did so I could start YouTube when I did. This line where Shadow says, "I'm super cool," I remember my brother really laughing at that line, my older brother, back when I used to show him every episode after I made it. I think he liked it kind of because it sounded a bit like Cartman from South Park. It's really strange how some episodes, some portions of episodes, I really vividly remember shooting. This one, not so much. I don't really remember any of it besides the opening scene, but others will really stand out for some reason in my memory. Before we progress further into the show, I want to say what I've said before, that all of Season 1 of Sonic Stop Motion Adventures is not canon to the rest of the show. The official canon starts at Season 2, which is Episode 10. I'd like to set it a bit further than that if I could, but the start of a season seems like a good place to start everything anyway. I think what really ties this scene together is the placement of the bread packages behind Shadow. Okay, so for Black Doom, I used this funny-looking orange alien plush that for some reason my family had. The story is that I remember having this yard sale, and this was one of the items my mom had for sale, and I was like, where did you get this? I was like, I'm keeping it, because this was the time when I just kept, like, anything I came across as a potential prop for a video. So we get Orange Alien Doom. And for some reason, I had no credits for this episode, just The End title card. Episode 4, The Mystery of the Black Chaos Emerald. This scene was shot at the foot of my bed in my previous room. You can see the comforter behind Tails. This thing that they're standing on was like this two-drawer rather, storage unit, but it was like unfinished, so the edges were really rough. I have no idea where this thing went. We eventually got rid of it, but I just remember it being really heavy. So the whole idea of the Black Emerald started because my brother had this black gem. Maybe it was like onyx or something. It was some kind of rock. And it looked like a Chaos Emerald, but black. So you can imagine how an 11-year-old would take that and run with it to do something interesting and Sonic related.
That'd be cool.
And we got a nice use of I'm Gonna Be by the Proclaimers, probably changed for the re-upload and the commentary.
Hey, who are you?
Okay, so this little Pokemon style battle was pretty fun to make, and it was also made completely in MS Paint, as you can probably tell. I have no reason for Sonic being level 56 and Yoshi being level 21. It was arbitrary, but I also wanted Sonic to like one-hit KO Yoshi. Right there when Sonic gets hit, his health bar goes down, but the HP number doesn't. In the original upload, I used an annotation to correct this, but since YouTube discontinued annotations, that will not be seen in the commentary or the season upload, so oh well.
Like you could ever beat me. I can't believe you even tried.
And after his long, treacherous journey, Sonic makes it to the Black Emerald. And even though it was a cool, like, oh, what could I use this for in a story, I had no idea what to do with the Black Emerald, so I just had it swap Sonic's colors. I don't know. The Black Emerald would come back and be explained in some form, that it was like 3 other emeralds combined, but it retconned later anyway, so in Season 2, so it doesn't matter too much. Just forget it. So, this might be one of my least favorite episodes, because it's so uneventful. Like, basically nothing happens. It's really short, just short of 4 minutes, and it even feels stretched out right here with Sonic having to go back to the Emerald and take pictures when he could have just done that. Like, it's played for comedy, but, like, I don't know, it just, like, can this episode please end? Another reason I don't care for this one too much is that the quality went back down from episode 3. It was good, and then it kind of like, oh, this is bad again. That is a Green Day poster I had on my wall. I guess I had taken it down for some other reason, but not bothered to move it for the video. Gotta love that. All these years later, I'm very much into music, and Green Day is still one of my favorite bands.
I found out something else when I was over there. Really? What? It gives me about as much power as all the 7 Chaos Emeralds doubled. Really? Wow, that's awesome!
This would be a running bit of showing this clip of an explosion anytime I needed to show something exploding. And I would do it with some other clips as well. But yeah, that clip with the whole Discovery logo and everything. The original music here is Paralyzer by Finger 11, changed for the season upload and commentary upload. A running trend in early Sonic stop-motion adventures is stretching the credits by any means necessary, because I thought having longer credits was cooler, but I didn't have anything to really credit, so I just ended up stretching them with like, oh, figures used, and like, oh, special thanks to my brother, he let me use his thingy. Episode 5, Sonic meets DBZ meets Naruto meets Megaman. What a title. Okay, so note the lack of title card, which I just forgot. I just completely forgot about it. So up until this point, this was the longest episode I made, coming in at about 9.5 minutes, although 2 minutes of that is just credits. Again, stretching credits for the sake of stretching credits. In the description of the original video, I mentioned this one taking 8 days to complete, 7 of which were just editing, so already the process was starting to take longer even in the early days. 2 other things I mentioned in the description were that this was my 100th video at the time, holla, and that the idea was inspired by someone who suggested Sonic meets Naruto, and then I just kind of took that and built off of it. Introduction of Zero, who would play a significant role in the show's first season, especially the 2 movies.
What the hell was that? Well, I suppose I better go check it out.
Okay, I did not originally intend to use text here instead of showing the Dragon Ball characters hearing the same sound. I have vivid memory of actually shooting the frames, and there's even one that shows up in the credits. I don't know what happened. I don't think I cut it out for time because I still had extra time. Maybe I just didn't feel like recording, or yeah, maybe that's what it was. Maybe I forgot to actually record the audio. Also, if you go back and look at that text, I refer to them as just DBZ people, not like characters or like Tien and Piccolo and Goku and Vegeta, whatever. Right here, incorrectly saying Bass's name. Nice, saying it as Bass. Gotta love it. This episode is a prime example of why I made Season 1 not canon to the rest of the series. It's quite a mess, from beginning to end. And it's from the time where the figures I had dictated the stories, not the other way around. What I mean by this is the fact that I would just use whatever figures I had. Back then I had a lot of toys of Dragon Ball characters, Naruto, etc. So of course as a preteen I would just kind of throw them all together in this like epic crossover episode. Why wouldn't you? At this point, it's still me doing all of the voices for every single character, and it's really easy to tell in this episode, because there's a lot of characters. It wasn't until episode 14 that I would start using Sony Vegas for editing, which means for all episodes before that I was using Windows Movie Maker. And that program went through some changes depending on what operating system you were using. I was using the Windows XP version. And I have vivid, haunting memories of getting so far with editing in some projects only to have it crash on me. Of course, Windows Movie Maker was a free program included on retail computers, so it wasn't designed for, you know, bigger projects like that. I mean, and this isn't even like a big project, but it would still crash a lot. I think later versions changed this aspect, but for the Windows XP version of the program, it would only let you have 1 track of audio. Of course, in my episodes, there's both music and voices at the same time, so my workaround was to edit the video with just dialogue and sound effects, and then render or save the whole thing as a video, and then bring that video back into Movie Maker, and then add music to it, because it didn't count as like an audio track if you did it that way.
Oh, that one kind of hurt a little bit. You hurt Piccolo. Now I'm gonna bring on the pain. Oh.
So when I made this episode, I had just started 7th grade, and you can even see under the Naruto gang coming up right, the textbooks right there for my classes, just with white paper covering them. I don't have them anymore, but those Naruto figures by Mattel were actually pretty damn good figures. I can't remember if those were just the first 3 I had, but I ended up having quite a few, like Naruto and Sasuke and some of the other ones. Sculpts and articulation were awesome, and for store-bought figures, like, they were really good. And I can say the same for most of the Jax and Irwin Dragon Ball figures. This battle-damaged Goku, I believe, is a Jax. Yeah, I think it's from one of the 2-packs. This is one of my favorite figures, like Dragon Ball-wise, and I think I still have it laying around somewhere. It's too bad that I didn't get to show the great range of movement on them, since the animation's still pretty subpar here. X making a cameo as a voice, but never appears. I don't think I had a Megaman figure at the time. Later, around the time of episode 15, I had actually brainstormed reintroducing Zero and X into the series for an episode. I had this somewhat slice-of-life idea that they were living in an apartment and were kicked out by their landlord, who was going to be vile. I don't think I had much of an idea besides that, but figure-wise, I had the figure arts at that point, so they would have looked a little better.
Thanks, X. I really owe you one. Here I come.
I guess Sonic can just turn into a werehog at will. I remember the werehog figure being the first put out by Jazzwares when they acquired the Sonic license. It was really exciting. Of course, this was around the time Sonic Unleashed was the most recent game, and I remember my friend saying, like, hey, there's a Sonic figure at Toys R Us. And I was like, what? I didn't believe him. But when I ventured to the store, I was greeted with this massive section of just werehog figures. It was like that scene in Toy Story 2 when Buzz is like looking down both the huge aisle of Buzz Lightyear figures, just somewhat smaller scale. I always hated how you could only move the knees of this Boo figure, but nothing else. It was like this huge block of plastic that you can't do anything with. It's so annoying. I think I really liked this specific table and the pillar on the other side of it because I used it as the quote-unquote set for a lot of early episodes. I want to take a moment to quickly comment on the Tails voice, which has since become an inside joke with my buddy Marshall. Dab on him, Marshall, if you're watching this. Yeah, I could never do a Tails voice, period, and I was kind of able to get away with it in the beginning before my voice dropped, but I just remember finally getting a VA for Tails because I couldn't keep it up any longer.
Oh yeah, Nebulator.
Some of the best animation I have ever done right here. Like, I really outdid myself. Look at that. That looks amazing. For a long time, it was really hard to look back at these early episodes. Like, around when I was doing, like, maybe episode 14 or so, I felt like I had improved so much, but these older episodes still felt so recent back then. So I tried to distance myself as much as I could from them, and I even put in the description sometimes, like, oh, these old episodes suck, go look at the new ones, or used an annotation to say the same thing. But now they feel like they're far enough back in the past for me to kind of see them in a more positive, nostalgic light. These early episodes are easier to watch now than later Season 1 episodes, and even early Season 2 episodes. There's this sort of childlike innocence to these that gets lost in the few that come after. This is the last episode using the first camera I had. I actually went through 4 different cameras over the almost 10-year run of the series. So here's what I was talking about. Again, stretching the credits out to seem cool. I thought I would list every single figure I used. Like, why? It doesn't... Ugh. One of these frames coming up, right after Gogeta, I believe, is showing the frame of... Yep, there it is. Piccolo and Tien, when I shot them, hearing the noise. Also, back in this time, I felt it necessary to list like the sound effects I used in the video description. If I did that now, I can't even tell you how long the descriptions would be. Shout out to this having almost 1.5 million views at the time I'm recording this. Like, I see why, but I just have to ask, like, dang, why? Episode 6, Defeat Metal Sonic. This episode opens with what was a first for the series, an actual opening. The original music I used here was D-Techno Life, one of the openings to the anime series Bleach, but I swapped out the sound only relatively recently, I think within the last year or so, because they got copyrighted. And if the episodes were still available worldwide but unmonetized I would have left them that way, but they actually got blocked in several countries, including the United States. And I didn't even notice that until my friends said they couldn't find episodes 6 and 7, so I don't even know how long they were gone. I remember the D Technolife opening being used more early on, but it was actually only used for 6 and 7, I guess. So, and after this, I would switch to using Live and Learn, which became the theme of the show. But of course, in the re-uploads and the season uploads, you'll be hearing a Live and Learn riff anyway, so it fits.
We can run faster than the fastest one on Earth. I don't know. Jeez. Are you the one that...
As you can tell, I really used the missile wrist figure quite a bit in the show. It was based on a specific robot from Sonic X, but at the same time it looked generic enough to kind of fill the role of whatever I needed it to at the time in each episode. I can't remember if I chose to do this like video film style for this section for comedic effects, or maybe it was because it was just simpler. I guess it gives it a little more life as like a recorded video, kind of.
Think you can stop me, Blue Hedgehog? Just try. Ha 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 ha. Ah, we need to go.
I have not yet brought up the fact that the Joyride Sonic figure is probably one of the worst figures to use for stop motion in my opinion, simply because it is a giant bendy figure with no actual points of articulation. And it's not like claymation, like it doesn't look good movement from frame to frame. It's a great figure besides that, and it really captures Sonic's in-game likeness from SA2, but not good for showing animation in the slightest. I also did have the standard Toy Island Sonic at the time, the one that was re-released like a ton, but likely did not use it because the Joyride one looks cooler and I like the figure more. Shout out to SpongeBob in the background, ayo! Of course, the robot makes a second appearance in the video. I don't believe I have the Missile Wrist robot figure anymore. I think I sold it not too long ago.
Blow this robot to bits. Come on, robot. Come on, you big bucket of bolts. I'm gonna...
I don't know if you've noticed, but this is the first episode with using a new camera. You can see the quality is... well, it actually looks kind of worse than the other camera. I had gotten a new one that was meant primarily for taking video, but it had a photo option, so, you know. It also had these two shattered pixels, which occasionally showed up as green dots towards like the left center of the frame. It was really annoying back then. I hated that. I also think this is where the episodes start to be really hard to watch for me personally. You know, as I said before, episodes 1 through 5 had sort of a childlike, innocent quality to them, where I didn't care a whole lot. But here we see the start of me kind of trying to be cool with my dialogue and other aspects in the show, and it just comes off really dated and really terrible in my opinion. Of course, it's easy for me to say that being the same person now grown up and actually being so much of a different person. In that way, I find these middle episodes hard to watch, harder than the first 5, that's for sure. I might have to go out on a limb and say episode 3 is my favorite episode from season 1. That I, you know, for the reasons I discussed prior.
I don't know, Shadow. Well, what are we gonna do to raise our powers really high in the next day? Well, I did see this thing on TV that worked. Well, what is it?
Another instance of the music getting copyrighted. The original music was Montage from the Team America movie. And it actually was synced to the animation back then, so you kind of lose that. As you can hear, I replaced it with Diamond Dust Zone Act 1 from the Genesis version of Sonic 3D Blast. That was actually my, right next to the rock in that previous shot was my old cell phone, flip phone. It was quite the tank. I think I remember it was like the same kind of phone soldiers would take into like combat. Like it was that strong of a phone. I do not have much to say about the sequence now because the original music made it what it was, for sure, but, you know, copyright, oh well. You know, people always ask, like, if you had a time machine, if you could go back in time, what would you do? I would probably ask myself why I thought it was a good idea to shoot with a busy intersection and road as the background here, because you could clearly see cars moving between each frame, and it looks horrible!
That was one of my least favorite Sonic games.
Talking a little bit more about the figures, the Toy Island Shadow I used for early episodes is actually a really cool figure. It does the character justice.
Come to get beaten again? Actually, vice versa. Okay. Ha, here I come. Ow!
The Metal Sonic figure I used was the San Diego Comic-Con exclusive JUVI figure by Jazzwares, and he actually made his first appearance in the show in the last episode. I forgot to comment about that. I think the JUVI line was really strange and just looked off for like every character, but Metal Sonic, it was passable given like the character's design. It was also pretty much the only Metal Sonic figure at the time, so, you know, I worked with what I had. Speaking of working with what you have, I do not at all miss the days of MS painting Sonic and Shadow yellow so I could show them in their super forms. Praise be to Jazzwares for making their super pack when they did, and also just shout out to Jazzwares in general because they became the, you know, that was the main line I used for the show. There's actually a frame coming up right here where I forgot to color Shadow's arm yellow when he does Chaos, Super Chaos Sphere right there. It's like, ew, gross.
Short-circuiting! Short-circuiting! Yeah, Tails, did you hear the news? What, Sonic? We beat Metal, didn't we, Sonic? Oh yeah, we did. Well,
So at this point of time, my voice had began to drop a little bit, but I wouldn't stop voicing Tails until the Timeline Paradox special after episode 11. And that was the last time I did so. And I remember, even back then, like, doing it as Tails, but being like, oh god, after this I am getting a voice actress, because, jeez. I have no idea what my attempt at the Tails voice even was. It sounds nothing like him. Maybe it's because the Toy Island's figure face looks really dumb or something, I don't know. Bootleg Sonic making another appearance. I guess Metal Sonic wasn't enough for this episode, so I crammed Bootleg Sonic in at the very end.
Episode 1 of this series, I've been a good guy, helping out Sonic. So, you can kiss your life, or, whatever you really want to call it. Goodbye! Oh no, take this! And now, the finisher, Chaos...
I have, like, no words for this section of the episode. So, as we'll see coming up, along with the opening, the series also got a better looking credit sequence. The original music used here was the SA2 version of It Doesn't Matter. Sonic music isn't generally copyrighted, but if you are in a country where you can still see the original upload of this, you'll notice that this section was muted. Back in around 2015, this company called eLicense started claiming a ton of Sonic music as their own, left and right. It affected a lot of YouTubers, a lot of Sonic YouTubers, me personally, my friend AJ. But Sega quickly took care of this. However, when they got claimed, YouTube had a tool to remove the copyrighted song, so I did, since these episodes were sort of whatever anyway. I changed it to another SA2 song. And now we land on Episode 7, A New Threat. Well, I'm sorry, A New Threat, as the question mark and exclamation point denote. If you are thinking to yourself, Steven, wait, what about the Sonic stop-motion adventures movies and specials from Season 1? Well, fret not, they are getting their own commentary upload between this and Season 2.
Hey Sonic, what are you doing? Oh, I'm just reading some of my fan
This now kind of seems like a very hubristic move to have Sonic, like, reading fan mail sent in by the viewers, but I think what I was sort of going for was, like, general fans of Sonic writing in, on obviously another fourth wall break, by the way. My handwriting actually looks like that, it's just a bunch of, squiggly lines. As you can see, I liked to transition a lot with text in the beginning, and even beyond that, I tended to arbitrarily have events set the next day. Like, Sonic and Shadow were there, and they decided to take the challenge, but they wait from, like, anywhere from 12 to 24 hours to actually act on it. It's like, there's no point. The figure I'm using here is the pirate robot from the Dragon Ball figure line, I believe by Jack Pacific. And the name Gamio Vert is a play on the words game over. I remember seeing this game over screen for, I think, what was a Castlevania game. But the words game and over were pushed up together to look like one word. And if you read that in a different way, you get Gamio Vert. And I thought using that as a name would be, like, so clever.
Oh my god, okay, that was a fucking dick move. Ugh, no matter. Take this! Huh?
I don't know what the deal is with this fortress I made out of like Coke cans and remotes and like, it's just a bunch of random stuff. Okay, so this trash talking section I'm actually going to mute for the sake of the commentary upload, just because that is how unhappy I am with it. It was in extremely poor taste back then, but especially by today's standards. I don't stand behind it at all, and I usually don't believe in censorship, but for the sake of the commentary, yeah, I'll strip the audio, just because I do hate it a lot. It's important to mention that the things Shadow says are not how I would actually handle trash talking by today's standards, or I guess roasting is what people call it. But I guess I figured that Shadow saying all of this would aggravate Gamio Vert, which was the point in the first place. Why can Shadow perform the Hadouken? Well, the answer to this is, at this point, my writing started relying a lot on references. Don't have something clever or original to say? Oh, that's okay, just reference something, and that'll get you there. That'll let the story stand up. This is one of, if not my biggest pet peeves about this era of my show, and thank God it's something I would eventually grow out of. A lot of the time, reference humor can be a crutch, and it absolutely was in my show. Like right here, just like, oh, just Pokemon, haha. And the fact that Sonic calls attention, like, oh, just a Pokemon reference, that doesn't make it any better.
Now, bow down to your all-powerful ruler, Gamio Vert.
It's also the fact that I remember my thought process being that referencing things like this and to other media somehow made the finished product cooler, when in many ways, in almost all cases, it did the exact opposite and just made it really lame and look kind of clumsy in execution, especially in hindsight. I'm not saying you should never make references to other things in your work, but more subtle references come off with so much more grace than just saying, hey everyone, movie quotes, TV show quote, haha Pokemon. Like, it's like, it's just... This also had to do with me as a preteen thinking lol random humor was like the best way to go. I think I started growing out of both of these around the midway mark of Season 2, and especially in Season 3. Pretty decent look at what my desk used to look like in my other room. The wallpaper on my monitor right there is a frame from Sonic 2. It's when you're fighting the boss of Hilltop Zone. But I was Super Sonic and was like standing on the ledge, and when you do that, Super Sonic does this really cool pose, so I took a screenshot of that. Also, if you compare my Tails voice right there at the very end of this episode to the last episode, they sound radically different. I don't know what was going on with my Tails voice. Back to what I was talking about with stretching the credits, I list several different categories of the production, including directing, script, voices, but they're all me, so really it's all unnecessary. Thankfully, the credits became much nicer looking towards the second half of Season 2. Episode 8, Tails' Birthday Bonanza. This is one of many firsts. It marks the official start of using title cards to introduce each episode. I remember getting the idea from the Angry Video Game Nerd, who used to use title cards illustrated by Mike Matei to introduce his episodes. In this instance, though, I cut the opening in favor of it before realizing it would be a good idea to have both, so next episode has both.
Oh yeah, this is happening.
And as you can see, it was the first episode to use different figures and was the last one to use the Joyride figure. For this episode, I took more of a Sonic Toast approach, swapping out which figure of the character I was using as I saw fit. It was sort of an experiment, and I started using the Jazzwares 3-inch line exclusively in the very next episode. That bit of Sonic running through the little obstacle course I included to try to show a little more low-stakes action, with Sonic doing more Sonic-like things, like, well, running for one. It was sort of inspired by the 2 Sonic stop-motion adventures level stop-motions I did on the side, which came before this episode. The lighting for both parts of this scene is just atrocious. It is so bad. The camera that I was using at this point sort of was like that. It didn't really have great white balance or just lighting in general. Some more reference humor here, haha, Vector Man for Sega Genesis. This one isn't as bad as some of the others, but it makes me wince personally because this was the time I was going through a phase of like, only old stuff is good. Old music is the only good music. Old video games are the only good video games. A lot of other like kids, like preteens and middle schoolers kind of go through similar phases. I'm very happy I am not in that mindset anymore. This was also the first episode to feature animated mouths, and as you just saw there, digitally painted expressions over the figures. This was something I kept up until around episode 12, when I then abandoned it, which is good because most of the time it really breaks the flow in my opinion. This was not an episode made for Tails' anniversary or anything like that, but rather just Tails' birthday in the universe of the show. I thought it would be kind of fun to do another episode focusing on a specific character, even, you know, with the rest of the cast still being around.
Happy birthday, Tails. Why don't we open up the presents first and... What was that? Who are you?
Who, me?
Yeah, you. Who else would we be talking?
Knuckles makes a callback here to the second movie, talking about how they flat out killed Goku, and also breaks the fourth wall by calling it the second movie. Raditz then retcons what happened to him, saying that he was possessed by a demon and he didn't actually die, and then Knuckles responds with, "Sounds like a bad fanfic." Okay, so the problem here is that saying it sounds like a bad fanfic does not make it sound any less like a bad fanfic. It does not get a pass because a character acknowledges that. This is the fallacy in screenwriting, where you have a character acknowledge something that is either convenient or inconvenient or strange or something negative in terms of the story's narrative. It's just shy of being self-aware, but it doesn't quite get there because it's more of a way of holding the hand of the audience, who might say, "Oh, that sounds like a bad fanfic," upon hearing the explanation given, and then the writer would hope they would hear Knuckles call this out, and then think that it's justified to be called out. Like, the audience would be like, "Oh, he agrees with me, well, yeah, okay," then it gets a pass, when that's not the case. Look, I might be reading too much into something I wrote 8 years ago, but it just shows how I would not do something like this now.
And if and when Tails wins,
I'll give you a copy of my Rocket...
Reference humor right there to Rocket Knight Adventures. It's actually a fantastic game, but it doesn't serve anything to the plot right here. For quite a while, I had a severely limited sound effects library at my disposal. This episode specifically came out in October of 2010, just about 4 months after the Sounds resource had launched, and I had no idea what that even was, or that it existed for several more years. So for this section of combat, the same punch sound effect is used over and over, and it gets old really fast. I also overused a ton of Dragon Ball Z sound effects because they were pretty easy to come by back then. Fast forward 8 years later, and I now have literally over 50,000 individual sound effects in my own personal library, and sound mixing was something I started taking much more seriously, and even priding myself on, especially in the last few episodes in particular. I would also later contribute to the sound effect community in 2016, where I ripped and uploaded all of the non-voice sound effects from Sonic Adventure 2 Battle. You can find my personal rip on the Sounds resource and on my channel.
I'm not showing my full power. Huh?
Note that I'm only using 4 Chaos Emeralds now, but they're different colors and are represented by the Jazzwares release of the Emeralds. With Tails powering up here, I found myself unable to not make an over 9,000 joke, but I thought I was being clever by saying, oh, that joke is overused, like Tails, that's what he says, like, oh, that joke is overused, so whatever, but like, it doesn't not make it an overused joke, so yeah, I don't get a pass from that.
Super Tails?
Now, it's time for you to pay.
All these years later, I still cannot believe I either forgot or was too lazy to edit his one tail right there that goes uncolored. It drives me crazy. Tails kills a man, the movie.
Tails, I never knew you were that strong. Heh, yeah. Well, let's finish this party. Happy birthday, Tails.
Another first here, the specialized credit roll for each episode, where I start listing all of the voice actors that contributed and the music that I used. Also, I figured, like, I thought time invested was a decent credit to include. Getting other people to voice for my series started in the second movie, but this was also the first episode to feature other voice actors, with my now longtime friend Moshe in the role of Raditz. You can look forward to hearing more commentary on this episode with him in the cast commentaries, coming at a later date. And I guess I have the Rocket Knight Adventures joke pay off, so there you go. Episode 9, Let's Cause Some Chaos. The series now sports a brand new opening featuring Live and Learn, of course by Crush 40, which remained the theme of the show right up until the very end.
Knuckles. Shadow. And many, many more.
The music I use here for the title card is so unfitting. Like, you'd think I would use something that sets up higher stakes. You can also tell by the title card itself I had really no idea what to show. This was an attempt at light conversation to sort of ease you into the episode, but it comes off very stunted and sort of like, oh, these few aspects about Sonic, yes, let me just talk about them. Sega Genesis, chili dogs, bam, that is Sonic's character. Not dissimilar to Episode 8, this one is also one of many important firsts for the series, things that would become staples later on, too. Two of the most visually obvious here are the fact that I now started using sets, and the first one we see is here in Tails' lab. I would later completely redo Tails' lab, as well as most of the other sets in the show, Tails' lab later became one of my biggest sets I ever used.
Yeah, he was in a really big hurry. His world was under attack.
Guys, come on.
Here it was constructed almost completely out of Legos, construction paper, and a little bit of cardboard. The second most visually obvious change is that this was now I was exclusively using the 3 3/4 inch line by Jazzwares, which became so popular among fans and collectors alike. The Tails that I used here was from the All-Stars Racing line, which for some reason came as like a lighter color, like he was a lighter shade of yellow, orange, whatever. I thought it looked really unique and kind of cool, so I would use this one for a little while before switching on to the regular release of Tails. Okay, so back when I was writing this episode, I was thinking, oh man, this is gonna be my biggest episode yet, and it's going to be so awesome and so deep, and I'm gonna make callbacks to the previous episodes, and it's going to be insane. My middle school was at the top of this humongous hill, and in 7th grade I would walk up and down the hill every day to go to school, and I vividly remember thinking about my explanations for things in this episode while I did that. Like, I remember walking to school thinking like, oh man, I'm gonna do this, and just how psyched I was because I thought it was going to be like the coolest thing ever. Before commenting further, I'm going to let a bit of the audio play out here.
Perfect. I had to do it in a secret and hidden place because, like I said before, it was strictly forbidden to ever even think of making the spell. You know of the Black Emerald, right? This thing right here, yes?
Yeah?
And You haven't come to wonder why you've only been able to find 4 of the 7 Chaos Emeralds.
You know, come to think of it, yeah.
Well, the spell I made combined those 3 missing emeralds you haven't been seeing. However, there was something else needed for this spell. I needed something to hold the emeralds together, and that something was the ZX power drive.
That's why it was in the Black Emerald.
Precisely. But something happened to me. when I was finishing-
Okay, so Dante the Spellcaster, he just explained that the 7 Chaos Emeralds were always in this world, but 3 of them were combined by him into the Black Chaos Emerald, held together by the ZX Power Drive, a plot device from the first movie. And for total transparency here, when I originally introduced the Black Emerald and the ZX Power Drive, I had absolutely no idea that I was building to this. Like, okay, back then, and for a large majority of my series actually, I operated on an episode-to-episode basis, having little idea of what the next thing I did in the show was going to be. The entire plot in this episode was sort of a way for me to cover my tracks, and explain and add detail to some things that seemed arbitrary up until now, and also, very importantly, to get the world back to 7 Chaos Emeralds. And like I said, when I thought of all this, I remember being, like, so unbelievably stoked with myself. I thought this was going to be so cool. I didn't necessarily see it as retconning, but in hindsight it really does kind of come off as that. The character of Dante was voiced by my friend Moshe, once again, who voiced Raditz last time. Pretty sure the only reason I picked Dante as the name was because it sounded cool and edgy. For the record, I was not at all into Devil May Cry, so that's not where I got it from. And of course I had no figure to represent Dante, so I gave this shoddy explanation that he was performing a spell and got trapped in the form of a robot, but also no one mentions that it's the same robot that's been in the series up until this point.
But it was actually a mock super.
And right here I explained that the characters were able to go super with only 4 emeralds, but it was like a mock super form, which is a pretty lame excuse because you can clearly see them going super in the last episodes, like, whatever, but I suppose it got the job done. So much of this episode is plot dump and explaining how things are, and it's kind of a chore to watch. The idea of Dante being the spellcaster that combined the emeralds and whatever, like, I feel like it's the best I could have done at the time, don't get me wrong, given my writing capabilities and all that, and also I also thought it was cool back then. Compared to episode 8, the animation quality has jumped a very significant amount, and you can really tell when it comes to the action in this episode. This is very much thanks to the Jazzwares figures having much greater articulation than anything I used up until this point.
Take this! Arr! I don't think so, Fox Boy. Seems to
I'm not entirely sure what I was going for when it came to designing the set for this scene. I just kind of covered everything in white. It'd be easy for me to say, like, oh, I was going for them being in the Arctic, but I don't think that's what I was going for. These painted expressions, right? Jesus. They really catch you off guard, and they sort of break the... Immersion's not necessarily the right word to use, but it does break immersion because it's really clear that they were added digitally. Maybe I thought it gave them more character. I don't know. That might have been what I was going for. Speaking of things being added digitally, mouths were now the norm for my show. And this was the old way I did mouths, by taking whatever frame I wanted them to appear on into GIMP, and then drawing over that specific frame with a mouth that was, you know, closed and then 3 frames of it being open. I also used to draw the tongues inside of the mouths with a red dot. And, you know, doing it that way is also why they never move while they have a mouth. The way I did mouths completely changed later in the sense that I would, you know, make sets of mouth PNGs and then motion track them accordingly to whatever character needed them later in the series. And I also stopped detailing the tongues. I guess just looked strange or something. The way I show Sonic Wind in this period makes it look so wimpy, and it doesn't move, like, at all. Like, it does move, but it's really slow and just, like, I don't know. The sound effects I used were also really weak, so that adds to it, or I guess subtracts to the effect of Sonic Wind I was trying to show.
I won't let it work for you.
You might have combined the 3 emeralds, but you can't decide who can use it or not. Ha! Witness true chaos! Don't hog all the attention, Shadow. Here I go. Ha!
Their power.
Like I said previously, during this period of the show, I was using GIMP. I had upgraded from MS Paint. GIMP is a free program similar to Photoshop, and honestly, for being a free program, it has a pretty decent amount of editing options. I never learned everything about it, but I do remember trying to use it to the best of my ability to make things look cool. These auras here were done with a standard brush, and then, you know, like a spray paint brush used over it, and it looks really strange because it's just like solid yellow when nothing else in the frame is, but I guess it I remember thinking it looked cool how I created like 4 frames and then would alternate between them to make them look like, you know, raging auras. This effect of Dante's voice, like going really deep and like kind of sounding corrupted, was completely added by Moshe freely, and I remember when I got them I was really surprised, like, whoa, he added this really cool effect. I thought it worked pretty well.
'Cause you're stupid.
Also, this is the only appearance of Super Knuckles and Super Tails in my show. Whenever the music changes volume in early episodes, it's really jarring because it just cuts to a different volume instead of easing into it. Sony Vegas has audio envelopes, which make things really easy, but of course, Windows Movie Maker did not.
0 left. Surely he must have taken it with him.
No, he didn't. He hid it somewhere and gave me a map to find it. He said he didn't need
In
it.
hindsight, this entire episode really feels like mopping up the mess I made in, you know, the series thus far. Almost like someone came in to write this episode, someone completely different, and saw what I had done with like 4 emeralds and a black emerald and a ZX power drive and just said, Jesus Christ, we need to do one big Control-Z on all of this. And I didn't mention that earlier in the episode, Sonic says Zero went back to his world off-screen, so he just noped out of the stop motion. Tails not only has a nuclear warhead, but also the launch codes. All of this is very treasonous, and it's easy to see why he was wanted for $1 million in Sonic Adventure 2. And upon seeing Tails reveal a freaking missile, Sonic's only response is, whoa, cool.
Into the sun. The rocket and the power drive will both be obliterated. And here's how we're gonna know if the ZX power drive
Okay,
was really
funny
delivered.
story about the way they plan to destroy the ZX power drive right here.
To my computer. And when the numbers-
Sit down for this one. My original plan was that the rocket would be shot off, turn around 180 degrees in the air, shoot straight down into the Earth, travel to the core, and then burn up. Yeah. I specifically remember when I was shooting this scene, I explained that to my brother, and he was like, that is so stupid. Why would they not just shoot it into the sun, if anything? And my response to that was probably something like, oh yeah. So I have no idea why I didn't think of that to begin with. Also, the notion that the missile wouldn't just explode the second it smashes into the Earth is baffling. This tease right here of Robotnik was really important because 9 episodes in, he was completely absent from the series. And the true reason for that was simply because early on I didn't have any Robotnik figures. It was early episodes were definitely before Jazzwares had made theirs. But I think at this point I had him for a few episodes, and I was eager to introduce him. It felt strange not having Sonic's main antagonist be a part of the show. I'm so glad that I no longer have to individually write down all the credits like over the frames like this anymore. It was really tedious. Well, that marks the end of the non-canon Season 1 of Sonic Stop-Motion Adventures. But before we move on to Season 2, there are still some specials and the movies that I have not covered yet, so I'll be seeing you next time with the commentary for those. Thanks for watching, and take care.